All right, so we'll get started. Today is the second in the future history teachers, or no, excuse me, in the careers for historians, or the careers for history majors series. Last week, we were talking about museums. Today, we're talking about teaching, especially at the 7 to 12 level. Our guests today, and I'll turn the floor over to Alexander and Hannah in just a second. Our guests are joining us as alumni of our history department and as gainfully employed folks out in the surrounding area. And also, if I may say, really two of the absolute best students I've had the great pleasure to work with. So I'm really excited that they came back to join us today. I want to note quickly in advance that there's a document that I'll be throwing in the chat a few times. It's a Google document. It's a cumulative collection of resources that I've shared. And for you folks here, I can also email it along for everybody to take a look at. But it does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the basics of what you need to be doing. Not all of it. Doesn't tell you everything you need to know, but a whole lot. And so I asked Hannah and Alex to talk about whatever they want to talk about and not feel that they need to get you from 0 to 60 with the most rudimentary fundamental things that by clicking through this link you could find in 30 seconds. Because we have these two fantastic teachers here with us today, and they can give us a lot of qualitative insights about their experience teaching at the 7 to 12 level. Okay. Credential information link is broken. Thank you so much. Thanks for the heads up, Moises. I'm going to turn the floor over to Hannah and Alexander. I don't think we really discussed who would speak first. Do you have a preference?
Alex can go first.
Alex first?
All right. Thanks, Hannah. I appreciate it.
I'll quickly introduce both of our guests, and then you guys can do a sort of a two-hander and back and forth, finish each other's sentences, or you can speak, for a few minutes each, and then we can move into Q&A and discussion and cover, I think, a lot of territory in about 50 minutes, give or take, and then I'm going to let our guests go. Okay, by way of quick introduction, Alexander Ponce is a graduate of our BA program, finished here, I think it was in 2015. Is that right, Alexander?
2013, close.
2013. And he is currently a teacher, jack of really all trades, teaching many classes and covering lots of ground. And so he's seen it from many different angles at the Riverside STEM Academy. And Hannah Knight, who will be speaking after Alexander, is a graduate of our BA, what year,
2014.
2014, and our MA program, 2022, and currently teaching at the Rialto High School. So these are our two fantastic guests joining us today. Please take a look at that link. Thank you, Moises, for the note. I am going to do some updating on that document tonight, including fixing that link and also sharing the materials that Alexander and Hannah have provided for us. I'm going to add those up onto the document as well. Okay, take it away, Alex.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. So like Professor Murray said, I graduated from Casa Bernardino in 2011, and I went to the graduate program at graduated in 2013, and I attended the UCR credentialing program from 2013 to 2014, and I work at Riverside STEM Academy. I teach the all history, social science class because it's a very small school. So I've had experiences teaching world history, AP Euro, AP US, and US, AP government and econ and AP microecon, because they switch things up quite often at our school. So I've been able to teach everything. So yeah, my journey to becoming a teacher is sort of a mixed one. I mean, I kind of found this through not only my love of history, but also through a lot of like trial and tribulation of where I was supposed to go with college. Originally getting out of high school, I actually graduated in 2005, and I thought I was supposed to be an architect or an engineer. I had always loved STEM topics, and I've always liked history, so it's been kind of weird, but I thought my career was supposed to take me towards something like that. Well, Eventually, I found my way to Cal State San Bernardino, who opened the doors to me in 2011 after, quite honestly, just being rejected from a lot of places, and it was the best decision I could have made to say yes. And so going to that department, I just got to like applaud Cal State San Bernardino's History Social Science department, because it preps you very, very well, not only to understand your content, but to be ready to communicate and be a teacher. Even if it's not exactly teaching you how to be a teacher at the moment, you don't know it yet, but it's prepping you very well for becoming a history social science teacher. So I just kind of wanted to share a couple things that when I was in my last year, 2013, doing my last senior courses with Dr. Murray, Dr. Yagubian, and everyone else at Cal State San Bernardino, things I wish I would have known, because that's part of what this whole thing is about, right? What do we wish we would have known before we became teachers, so that hopefully the transition from our BA to our master's or the credential program would be a little bit smoother. And I've always written down a couple things to mention that I feel like are really important. And today I have 4 things. If you go back to the archives of all these videos, I've probably said something like this or different iterations. But here are some things that I feel are really important if you're considering being a teacher, that you kind of got to know what you're getting into, because you're going to hear a lot in different sources, whether it's social media, in mainstream media, or in just circles wherever you are where they discuss teachers, about what it's like. But not until you really live through it do you really understand what it could be like. So here are just 4 things that I feel are really important for everyone to kind of understand, that if you really want to do this, are things that I feel, based on my experience, that you kind of have to take into consideration if this is the route you want to go down. And so number 1, I really feel like relationships are much more important than content. Your content is secondary to everything else you're doing as a teacher. And I know that sounds weird, but you're working with 7 through 12 students. These are kids that are coming from all kinds of backgrounds, experiences, and often the number 1 challenge that you find with many students to succeeding in school is the getting to believe in themselves. And you could have the most amazing presentations on, the Silk Road, or, whatever's happening in this time in medieval Europe, or whatever it might be, right? And it could be really awesome. And some kids might really find that interesting, but the most impactful thing you can do as a teacher, and the thing that you have to be ready to do more than anything, is to build relationships with students, because from there is where your trust is going to come. From there is where the buy-in to do is what you're asking of your students to do. From there is going to come your classroom management, because to be there to, browbeat and, tell students what they can and cannot do all the time can get very exhausting. And building relationships enables you to manage your classroom better and to get to the heart of what you're supposed to be doing eventually, which is to teach the content, right? So number 1 is, if you are thinking about doing this, I really think that asking yourself, am I capable of building trust with others, and doing that on a scale of 30, 36 students per classroom, and multiplying that times 5 or 6, like it's my case, I teach extended day. If you can do that, then you're probably already in a good position to handle the task of being a teacher. The second thing I recommend is that always remember that progress is more important than perfection. It's not about being perfect, because you're always going to learn year to year. In fact, you'll learn period to period. This happens to me every day, where if I teach the same prep 2 periods, the first one may not always go as well as I wanted it to be, but I certainly learn so that the second period is going to get a better experience than what the first one got. Even if it's just as simple as like, I forgot to play that video, I should have done that. Now my second period students are going to benefit from that. And my intention should be that if I do this again next year, I will not make that mistake again with the first period. I will do it better that next time, right? So it's always making yourself better and perfecting what you're not perfecting, but always making progress, not always expecting perfection. So progress is more important than perfection. Number 3, and this is, I could not recommend this enough, beg, steal, and borrow. In the credential program, they're going to tell you right away that one of the things that you do to survive, especially as your student teaching year and then your first year, is to beg, steal, and borrow. You have to rely on the sources that others have created to get your head start. Because like I said, when you're focusing on building relationships and community and classroom management, prep is going to be important, but you definitely want to minimize the stress that comes along with that by seeing what's already out there. I mean, I often talk to Jeremy about this, rebuilding the wheel. There's stuff out there that's already made. Sometimes we need to be innovative, and that's always encouraged, but let's take advantage of the things that are already there so that we can focus more on the teaching part and not so much the creation part. You could do both, of course, but the first couple of years, it's a little bit about survival. So beg, steal, and borrow. Finally, reach out. And you don't want to be the only person taking on the task of everything you're doing. And if you're lucky enough to belong to a school that has a department where there's many history teachers, social science teachers, that's great. Make at least one friend because you're going to need them, even if it's just for those lunch breaks where you need a break, where you need a time away from students or after school to connect on anything. And if you can be lucky enough to even make it outside your department, I highly encourage you to make friends that are outside your department as well, too. Talk to the math teachers, talk to the science teachers, talk to the Spanish teacher, talk to anyone else, because they see your students too, and they can give you insight into, how you're doing and from a different subject. So reaching out can even inspire collaboration. You can work on things that, you can collaboratively help your students all together, because in the end, it is about the students. And so you want what's best for them. Okay. And as I remember, there was one last thing. So I'm going to amend my only 4-point things. And this is the last thing I'll mention. It is the keeping up to date with the current conversations about education. By this, I simply mean that if there's talks about new approaches to education, in a little while, if interested, I could talk a little bit about one thing that we're doing at our district, which is universal design learning. We colloquially call it just UDL. That's the abbreviation for it, the acronym. And knowing what UDL is, for example, is a way for you to understand why is it an approach that districts are adopting and working out in their whole school. And it gives you a little insight as to like what might be coming down the pipe, whether it's from your state level or the federal level department, or just regionally, something as a wave is coming your way. To know about the conversation about education today is helpful, because it will maybe even enable you to be an agent of change, or at least to be a ready recipient of what's happening, so that you can assess how you might see it play out in your school, or at least in your classroom. So yeah, that's my thing. In summary, number 1, again, relationships are greater than content. 2, it's about progress, not perfection. 3, beg, steal, and borrow. 4, reach out, make friends. And number 5 is try to keep up to date on the current conversations about education. All right, I've said enough, Hannah. It's your turn.
Thank you, Alexander.
I'll kind of move more to the middle, just so I'm not
Yeah.
totally off screen. Okay, good. Sorry, guys, this is weird for me. We're back in person. So, I'm Hannah Knight. If you're just recently joined us, I teach at Rialto High School. I've taught for, I think this is going on my 8th year at Rialto High School, so I've kind of been at the same school. Like Professor Murray mentioned, pretty much have spent my entire education career here. BA here, and then master's program, and then also credentialing program as well. Alex really kind of hit it out of the park. He said a lot of what I was going to say. So really, I would probably I'm going to reiterate a few things that he mentioned, maybe expand on it. But I think Alex and I had a little bit different kind of path when it came to teaching history. I kind of knew I wanted to be a teacher from day one. Part of that is my mom is a teacher, so that's kind of in the genes. And then I always loved history, so those things kind of collided. But I think in kind of going through kind of this idea of what I wish I would have learned or known before I got in my position. I apologize if I stumbled. I've kind of been up since 4 a.m. So apologize, guys. It's been the day for me. But one of the things I wish I would have known is you have to be adaptable. And I think Alex kind of got on this a little bit, but you first have to kind of be adaptable when it even comes to your position in the first place. You don't have a choice. I know a lot of us I want to teach US history. I want to teach AP. I want to teach government, but I currently teach US history, AVID 11, and AP world history. I've taught world history as well. And I didn't go into there thinking I would ever teach AP. I didn't ever think I would teach AVID, which is not history. I didn't go, it's a completely different subject. So when you are hired, a lot of times you are hired under the title social science teacher. And a lot of times, if you have a desire to go for high school is not always open. So being adaptable is really key. I mean, I wouldn't turn down middle school jobs because honestly, there's a lot of great things happening at the middle school, and sometimes at your pathway into the high school, if that is where your heart is. I really, and also adaptable, which kind of like what Alex was getting at, like relationships are definitely key. You are their person, and part of that is like being willing to kind of change your lesson. I mean, today, for example, there were, I don't know if many people have kind of been hearing on the line with going on social media, the threats going on. I had half of classes all day. So I was missing half of my students. If I have an average of like 160 students, I only saw 80 kids today. So obviously lessons change, and you have to kind of be willing to make changes, as Alex was kind of talking about, like you change from class period to class period. Really, my decision was made within like 5 minutes before the final bell rang, because I was waiting to see if I had my class. So adaptability is key. You have to be very flexible, be willing to throw out lessons. Some lessons work, some lessons don't work. And sometimes, what lessons that didn't work one year, they'll work the next year. Don't throw anything away. In that sense, like Alex is saying that you are collecting all these sources and everything like that, I would advise not paying for anything. There is a lot of amazing resources. There's a lot on the document that Professor Murray has shared that is free. I mean, there are organizations out there that have heart for teachers. So I would maybe kind of avoid teachers pay teachers, just because, we don't get paid a lot. So you want to save your money. I think the other thing that I wish I would have known going into this is that your responsibilities are more than just the classroom. A lot of us like to kind of live in our bubble and just, we think we're only teaching history and everything like that, but a lot of us don't know that there's IEP meetings, there's PTC, sometimes, be prepared to stay 2 hours after school. I mean, on average, our class day ends at 3:20, but a lot of times I'm there till 5, sometimes 5:30. You've got kids that are willing to be in the classroom, and sometimes you're kind of a safe environment for them. And I teach AP, so a lot of them are, working on getting ready for the AP exam. But when it comes to kind of touching on what Alex said about staying current, I mean, currently education with history and everything like that, if you are looking, one of the things that I would recommend if you are thinking out of state, California, we have a lot of, it is very open to, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different history, which is one of the bonuses of teaching in California. We kind of want to listen to all the voices, but you have to, when you are looking outside of California, you have to think about if they have the same policy. Education is like always changing every single day. So definitely when you are starting to kind of do the job hunt, you want to look at the state that you're looking into, and you also want to look at the district that you're looking into, to see what their policy is. If they have a pacing guide, if they don't have a pacing guide, because a lot of times that will kind of determine, if there's no pacing guide, that gives you a lot of freedom, but for some people, they don't love that. They need kind of structure, just like we need to give our students structure. I think Alex kind of nailed it out of the park, so I'm like trying not to copy too much of him, but yeah, I mean, really, your community is like, you're important, like just as building community with your students, if you can find a department that's like willing to work together, like that's key. You are each other's kind of support system. You guys are kind of a place to bounce ideas off of, like help out with lessons. So that is not always what you're going to find. So sometimes you have to kind of build it. So I think that's kind of some of my main things that I wish I would have known going into, and also kind of what I can think of off the top of my head, but. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. That's really great. And you both gave us a lot to think about. Like I said, some of the nuts and bolts, if it's on the tip of your tongue and you're in Zoom land, please click through that link and see if you can find a quick answer. But I also want to welcome everybody on Zoom and here in the classroom if you have some questions.
I actually have one.
Go, jump in.
So for you to, how many districts did you guys apply to before you got into your current positions?
I mean, I don't know about Alex, but I mean, I pretty much did. I knew I wanted to stay locally. in the very beginning of my career. So I pretty much hit all the job fairs that, you know, Cal State San Bernardino through the credentialing program, they have a job fair that they put on. There's like Chafee has a job fair, Rialto has a job fair, so you pretty much go through a lot of them. But honestly, I don't know about Alex, I found my job through substitute teaching. And really, I think that's one way to do it is you substitute at all of the districts and they will tell you first.
No, I think Hannah's absolutely right. Yeah, I didn't get it through substitute teaching, but I certainly was lucky enough to get into the district that I grew up in. But I threw my application out there everywhere. I was applying to Northern California, Central, Southern. I mean, when I was applying for jobs, it was in a very transitory part of my life where because my wife and I were just about to get married, and we said, well, wherever I get a job, that's kind of where we have to go, right? And so again, lucky enough, I only had to. I went through a couple of different interviews. I applied to the Alvord District, Riverside Unified, the Rialto one as well too, the Chafee one as well. Yeah, I applied everywhere. So you will be expected to apply as much as you want to, but Hannah makes a really, really good point. The best way to get yourself into a district is by substituting. I mean, I know that I've had a couple of student teachers already. One of them actually was able not only to get into the credential program, but to find his way into my school was through subbing. He was subbing at Riverside High School for about a year or so, and when he came over to me, he was already ready to deal with all the demands of a classroom. So you do a lot, yeah. And I'm sure maybe you know or don't, but EdJoin is the one that we all use to apply for jobs. I can put it in the chat right now to see just jobs for teachers, but yeah, so you'll apply a lot.
I think it's also on the document, the working document too, like, yeah, EdJoin is where all the postings are gonna be, so.
That's great, and we are gonna have a substitute teaching session. So we're gonna, I'm gonna see if I can get, I know Jonathan Orlemans, who's joined us before, and I think I'm gonna try to get Phoenix, who some of you guys know, to join us, and Jesus Rufocava. So we're gonna have a nice group, I think. And then Chelsea has a question.
Yeah, I kind of have a sort of similar question, so I guess I can pivot mine a little bit. I have my credential and just waiting for the pools to open up on EdJoin now, and a little bit concerned about the oversaturation of history teachers. So just pivoting to maybe the interview, ways to make yourself stand out as a history teacher. I know I have the potential of getting a science credential also, but I've been told if I got that, I would never teach history. So, I mean, can you speak to how true that is, or how your interview processes went, how you stood out?
Do you want me to go first, Alex?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so first things first, yes, you do run the risk if you have a second credential that you will get hired for the second credential. It's happened to a few history teachers that I know, not that it will be in your case. But when history is kind of the career that you kind of have to wait. This is a terrible phrase, but you kind of have to wait for the person to die in their chair. We tend to stay there forever. I know that there are some positions opening up. I mean, I can speak a few in my own school, but I think to go back to your original question, they always look for teachers that do more than just their content. So coaching is an excellent way to kind of make yourself stand out, especially if you are going to be bringing a sport that they don't have. I mean, one of the teachers I went through the credentialing program brought badminton to the high school, and that had never happened before, and it's still going strong. If you can get I mean, really, if you're willing to kind of teach everything, I'm not saying that you shouldn't get the second credential, but you might want to try going for history before you go for it. My interview, I think, was because I was already part of the district, I got hired off of a 15-minute interview. I mean, it was quick. But I had built that relationship already. I already had a reputation with the district. The middle school that I had done a long-term teaching at was wanting me to, so I was fortunate that I got kind of pick where I went, but yeah. Alex, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that was really great. I think that I couldn't say much about the if you had a second credential, if it would like impede you from getting a job or not. I think Hannah answered that very well. But for the interview, I think what helped me get my job was knowing a little bit about what the school or the site is about. It would definitely help. So, as an example, I applied to our USD, but STEM High School is the one who asked me to come in for the interview. And so I try to do, I wouldn't say I did a lot of research, but when they were asking questions like, what do I do differently than other teachers that would make me more engaging, more dynamic than another teacher? I talked a lot about how I see I see STEM in everything that we do. Just because I'm a history teacher doesn't mean that I cannot appreciate the sciences and mathematics and anything like that too. And I also agree with Hannah that I even gave examples of what I would be able to do with my background in science and engineering and stuff like that in a setting like a history course. And I talked about skills that, I also can offer these sorts of things with my lessons that go beyond just the textbook and stuff like that too. So Hannah's right. You have to be willing to do almost anything to get the job, because if they need someone to coach soccer, you say, I will do it. I've never played a minute in my life, but I'll do it, right? If they want you to teach Avid on top of, maybe 2 or 3 preps of world history and something else, then okay, I'll take it on, right? Because you have to be adaptable, like Hannah said, and I totally agree with that. So when it comes to the interview, make sure that you know the place that you're going to interview at. Do a little research. Read the mission statement of the school. Every school has a mission statement, and they even talk about what they're about, like whether they're a core knowledge school or they're a PBL school, or that they are really focused on STEM, or they really care about arts or whatever. Make sure that you're coming in with a knowledge of what the school is like, their special programs, and if there's anything on there that catches your eye, like I noticed you have an academy that does this or this something else, I'd be very interested in helping with that, or starting a club that will bring these things to it. And speaking on that topic, mention if you were as part of any clubs when you were in your undergrad or your credentialing program. Like I think Hannah, you probably were in this too. We were both part of history club at Cal San Bernardino. That we were. I know I was very happy to be part of the history club. And if you bring that and say, I'd like to do something like that at our school, where we talk about history, or I get kids more interested in history, or participate in National History Day, right? All that stuff would help you become a lot more hireable, I would say. So yeah.
That's great. That's a lot. Thanks.
Just to add on to that really quick before, Alex made a really good point about like knowing the district. One of the questions I got at the job fair is like, do you know the breakdown of our students? And that's the demographics. So like, they'll even look to see if do you know the racial ethnic breakdown? Because I mean, that does factor in, that's part of the culture of the school, so.
Those are 2 things we heard last week about the museums as well. So that, well, a few things. You both mentioned the importance of relationships, and we heard that as well. We also heard enthusiasm over content, which it isn't necessarily. I mean, you can take that to extreme, and you really don't know your stuff. Of course, that's not an issue for any of us here. But in the museum interview, they really want to see that you're enthusiastic, but also that, as you both said here, that you have some knowledge of the institution. That's a really important thing that can set you apart. Moises, were you going to jump in?
To be honest, I forgot what I was going to ask because I got absorbed in like the current conversation.
All right, well, flag it, if it comes up again, flag it, and please, you can throw it into the chat, and then we'll also be able to ask it live. But thanks for that, and if it comes back around, please jump back in. I think that I'm excited about some of the echoes from last week's museum panel in that sense, so that we're going to hear a lot of things in different permutations over the next 8 weeks, and those ones are really important. If you want to get a job at a place, you can be hot shit. You can have all your stuff all in great shape, and if you come in and you're at Rialto High and you say, and that's why I'm good for this job at Riverside High School. My friend, you will not get that job. I don't think you're gonna get that job. I think that's a really important point, you know, that you come in, and I've done some interviews now, and I've been on the other side of the interview table as well. So I just want to echo that, a little bit of planning and a little bit of research about the institution can go a very long way, where you could come in and demonstrate some fundamental understanding. If you have a really deep understanding and you can demonstrate that, that's also great. But at least a rudimentary understanding of the place where you're applying it's what we heard last week about the museums, and we're hearing it again. So I really want to reiterate that little bit of recon is going to go a long way in that interview process. So I hope everybody takes that away. A pacing, there's a specific point, a pacing guide. Can you tell us what that is?
So, and this is actually one of the links that I shared with Professor Murray,
Oh,
is
great.
that there are frameworks that you have for teaching history/social science in California. It is on the California website, education website. It is broken down by grade level. So you have certain topics you have to cover. So for example, just using US history because it's on my brain. One of the topics that you have to cover is World War II, but underneath that, it gives you certain points that you have to make sure you cover. So for example, you have to make sure that you bring up FDR's for freedom speech. So there are certain topics that you have to cover, and you have kind of to get all the way to the present. I say try to, but like I said before, it's not always, you know, achievable because we have approximately 180 days to do it. And some of those days you've got, you know, people pulling fire alarms. So you lose a day. But pacing guides is how much time you spent per topic. One of the things I would kind of wish I knew, or at least kind of learned very early on, is that if you teach high school, the last time they took a history class was in 8th grade. And the kids do not retain history like we do, because a lot of them don't love history. That's the other thing that you're gonna get. Like, I don't like history, but I like you as a teacher. You'll get that quite a bit. So you have to kind of build in a month of review. So pretty much if you're doing US history in high school, that is covering from the colonies all the way till 1877 before you have the actual like main stuff. So some districts have a little bit more of a guide for you about how to do that, which topics to cover. Sometimes you are building that pacing guide, so.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that was really funny too. And I don't like history, but I like you. I've gotten that before. It's really nice. The pacing guide, depending on your class, is just not just there, but it is literally a guide to say how much time should you be spending on, for example, FDR's for freedom speech, or if you then talk about the Cold War, how many weeks do you have to cover the Cold War before you get to maybe another part in history. And these are provided not only by the state, but if you teach courses like Hannah and I do, AP World History, AP US History, College Board also gives you recommended pacing guides on how long you should spend on all these things. If you're working at a place that doesn't have a pacing guide, then the idea is that you just have to teach the standards, but you get a little bit of like freedom on how long you get to teach each one of them. And as a reminder, I've had this discussion with a lot of colleagues as well too about standards and what they are meant to be. Are they guidelines? Are they, credo or whatever they teach them? But they are there to guide you, and they are there to remind you that as an employee of the district, as the content that you're supposed to be teaching. And if you have a little bit of freedom, and this often depends on your district and your site, to go beyond that, to bring the fun stuff that you learned about when you were in college or other places and include some of your own, maybe monographs or short readings or anything like that, it would be helpful. But again, coming back to the standards is really important, and the pacing guide is there to help you with that too.
I think you both mentioned that sometimes the kids won't like history. Do you have any strategies to get them to maybe like it more?
You can go first, Anna. Go ahead.
Okay, I was like, I've been going first a lot. I want to be fair here.
Okay. Would you like me to go then? Is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
All
I've
right,
been
cool.
doing
I'll
first a lot.
Okay. Well, I have one suggestion. So one thing I do at the beginning of the year is I do this history skills building exercise where I apply history to their life, right? And I say like, you actually do like history, you just don't know it. So I pick on something that they like. A lot of our kids like things like Star Wars, anime, whatever it is. And whatever they like, there's a lore. There's a lore for everything, isn't there? Like there's a fantasy or sci-fi and whatever you like, there's always a history and origins of what you're doing. And I'd mentioned like that's kind of what we're doing in this class. It's just with subjects that you don't care about, which is, you do like it just with something you don't like, right? And so with the history skills building exercise, we kind of delve into their own lives and talk about like, okay, so considering skills that we teach in history, like continuity and change over time, comparison, historical causation, I apply it to their real life and I say, okay, so think of a moment that was a, watershed moment in your life, something that happened to you that changed you forever. Maybe it was the first time you listened to your favorite artist's song, maybe the first time that you experienced, I don't know, whatever it might be, like what dating is or whatever, right? And how did that cause a change in your life and go forward with that? So that's what's one thing, to make history accessible through lived experiences and the personal, because as a good friend of mine one told me, it's like nothing really matters until it's personal, right? And so to make it personal for them requires a little bit of like creativity on your part to say, let's see how history, which I always remember this that Jeremy told me, Dr. Murray told me, is like history is inquiry. It's inquiry. It is inquiry. That's what it is at its most basic. So when you question anything, that's what history is. And then when you delve into the why and how things came to be and you try to explain it to somebody with as much evidence and analysis reasoning, that's what it is. And so we have fun talking about like, okay, so we all like the shows The Office, or we like series like Star Wars, and we delve into like what is the lore and the causes and how do these things show continuity and change over time. It's a way for them to do that, but it's also your own personality and who you are. I mean, one way to just get anyone interested in how you like things is to show you're passionate about it. And I'm sure Hannah could attest to this too, is like when the kids see that you're passionate about something, even if they never are going to have the same degree of passion for it as you may have, they love that you're passionate about it, and they love that you make it as engaging as possible. So you might inspire some to end up liking it. So that's my quick answer, I guess. Say.
Thank you.
Yeah, and those are like really good points to make. And I think the documents are important. I wouldn't shy away from the documents because like a lot of kids will find them like, oh, why do we got to read again? Or why do we got to write? Like for us, that's part of the skills they need. And if our goal is to kind of get them to the next part of their life, whether it's career, whether it's college, they need those abilities. And one of the things that we're kind of coming back from COVID is a lot of students have kind of fell a little bit in their reading skills. So as much as that is possible, like don't shy away from that, but also mix it up. Like don't do that every single day. So what my kids really love is when either we do like a simulation or like game or competition. So for example, for the Cold War, during the age where everyone's accusing everyone of being a communist, I bring in this game called the Red Dot Game, and they get a chance to accuse each other of, or trying to form groups of like, oh, let's just get non-communists over here, and someone secretly comes in and like sneaks their way as a communist. Like it's fun. It's, you get people, it's chaotic. You got to let the chaos happen. Sometimes it's like, it is okay for them to get a little bit energized. But at the end, they get it because they were able to play it out. Or bring in games, bring in competition. So, like Kahoot is an awesome resource because it's a chance for them to kind of review questions, but they also get to see where they are, like, oh, I'm number one, or like the scales move. But definitely like bring in a variety of sources because you can't hit every kid with every lesson. Like some kids are more, they need the reading, they need the notes, but then you've got kids that like are, tactile learners. They need to be moving, they need to be like touching things. So definitely variety is key.
It's really, really good. Gosh, you guys are great. This is such good ideas. This is exciting for my class. Moises, before you forget your question, jump in, please.
Yeah, what was the process of student teaching like? Because my understanding is you just straight up get thrown to the wolves. You start working as a teacher, no preparation, no nothing, and you're not supposed to have another job during this time period. So you just like You become a teacher with none of the benefits of being a teacher, basically. Is
Man,
my
that's too
understanding, at
accurate. That's kidding. No, not too accurate, but a little bit. You want to go first this time, Hannah?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I wouldn't say you can't work while you're doing it, because I did. So it depends on what type of student teacher you are. So there is the, I forgot the word of it is, but, and Alex, you might remember the word and you can help me out, but you actually take over a classroom when you come in. I'm like, forgive me, I'm 4 a.m. brain right now, but you actually do come in, you take over an entire classroom and you are the teacher. You do actually get paid for that. That's the nice thing. But you are on your own. I will say that those history positions are very few. So you'll actually find that more commonly with like the maths and the sciences for those types of positions. And then you also have like the student teacher, like where you actually have a master's teacher. And really, to be honest, and I know this might be a little bit terrifying, it depends on your master teacher. You could have an amazing master teacher and you could have one that you are excited to leave at the very end. I was thrown in week 1. So yes, I was actually thrown in week 1 and took over the classroom on that Friday and then was kind of running things from the very beginning. And that was technically like maybe like 2 months before I had to. So, but I did work on the side. You can't, if you are subbing, you can't sub for anyone but your teacher. That is the rule. That might be what you're thinking about, is you can't sub for anyone but your teacher. So.
Yeah, right. No, that's a really good description of it all. Yeah. For my experience, it depends. Yes, Hannah's right that it depends on your district cooperating teacher. They will obviously set the tone of how you're going to be doing your first, year 2. And it also might depend on your program. Like at UCR, our credentialing program was, we start week 1 with our DCTs. We go in and we are going to learn the culture. We're not supposed to teach until like maybe the 2nd or 3rd week. But yeah, during that time, you slowly get edged into, you introduce yourself to 1 class, then 2 classes as time goes on, 3rd. And by the time spring comes around, you're taking over almost all the classes for your DCT. So ours was kind of like a bit of a slow, and then that's more recent too, or a little bit of a slower rollout. But Hannah's absolutely right. Depending on your DCT, that stands for District Cooperating Teacher. That we used to call it Master Teacher. That's what it is now. But yeah, if they're great and they're helpful, then your transition will be, really, it could be really good and not as like heavy as possible. But I was in cohorts with people who, they were becoming their own DCT's therapists, hearing them cry at the end of the week, and they're holding each other like, what are we going to do with these classes? And poor us as student teachers, like, you tell me, you're the teacher, I'm the one just supposed to learn from you, right? So it could be a mixed bag, right? But yes, you can work if you're not under the constrictions that Hannah had mentioned. I actually was working an office job while I was doing my student teaching, because I needed to pay rent and stuff too. So you can do it. It's possible. You can just get very, very hectic, because during your credentialing program, one of the biggest things that you have to worry about besides your student teaching is your EdTPA work, what they call that now, which is like getting your big report ready to pass your program and get your pre-credential before it can become clear later on, right? And so that is a huge heavy toll on your homework part, what you have to do for school, and then there's the whole planning that you do for your own student teaching. So it can be very cumbersome. And then if you add a job into the mix like that, like Hannah and I know that, it can be very, very like difficult. It is rough. I'm not going to say it's easy at all, but it certainly will give you a like small insight into what it's like being a teacher. And I would say that a question you should also ask is, what is it like after you're done student teaching? Your first year when you're fully on your own, that is a different thing altogether. But it's not as bad as being thrown into the wolves, but it is an adjustment to have to learn how to navigate the multiple responsibilities, your own homework, your teaching, and your being there for your students and your DCT. And if you have a job, that other obligation that you got. So it can be pretty rough.
I actually want to piggyback off of like what Alex said before. I think we saw a question in there too. So Alex mentioned a really good point that I don't think any of us thought to ask was what happens once we do get hired. So first things first is that, like he mentioned, they were called TPAs, but they're kind of the same thing. It is this very long document that you have to do everything from writing a lesson plan to creating an assessment to finally videotaping yourself and showing that you are teaching. That is probably the worst one. It is.
It is, yeah.
Once you
Yeah,
get
totally.
hired, I think we all hate watching ourselves. Once you get hired, well, let me back up a little bit. When you do the credentialing program, you end up with something called a preliminary credential, which means you've got your credential, you can go teach. But it is preliminary, meaning that you have to go through, I know they make you jump through a lot of hoops. When you get hired, you have to go through a program that was formerly known as BITSA, but it is now called induction, which
Yes.
means that you are, in a sense, I kind of attribute it to being like the credentialing program 2.0, and that you are still going through training. So like you have trainings, however many often, you still have someone coming into your classroom and checking on you, and there is still, and I don't know if Alex had to do this, but for my district, we had to still do a wonderful form that was very reminiscent of the TPA about certain things that we have to hit. And you have to do this program within 5 years. Otherwise, you get to do the whole credentialing program again. So that is your first 2 years of teaching. And I know earlier we mentioned, and I think it was Chelsea that had asked this question about like how to sell yourself. You do want to kind of say like, I'll do a lot of stuff, but just kind of keep in mind those first 2 years are the induction program. You don't want to overload yourself. Because again, like you're building your curriculum, you are building your relationship, you're getting used to school, plus you have this whole other program on top of it. So I know a question came into the track, but Alex reminded me of a question I wish I had asked before I got started teaching, so.
Yeah, exactly. Because the induction program, like Hannah said, is like your credential program 2.0. You still have to, you have to again. And when I was doing it, we had to create a like unit plan. It was a lesson by lesson, and then show that you are still working on your lesson building, paying attention to how you evaluate yourself. We have a framework that we do to evaluate teachers called Danielson too, that we use to like evaluate how teachers are doing. That how are you reflecting on your progress on that? So yeah, it's another big report that you have to do, just like your TPAs that eventually, you know, you're going to be like, oh, it's the bane of your existence for a little while, but then once it's all done, it'll be another thing to just be really glad you're done with. So yeah.
And to answer Moises' question, so you don't do your student teaching until you are in the credentialing program. That won't even start yet, so you don't have to worry about it yet. And in fact, the credentialing program, whichever one you go through, will help you find your position. And honestly, like when you actually start being in the classroom depends on your program. I was an accelerated program, so I did it. It's normally 2 years. I did it in 9 months. And I technically didn't have to be in the classroom every single day. I just kind of made it a point to be in the classroom every single day, just because, again, relationships, you will find that when you do take over, it is so easy because they know you, they've seen you. But you don't have to worry about it until you go into the program. So I think that was the full question.
Yeah, and then Chelsea and then Antonio.
Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up question on induction. When I was in the program a couple years ago now, they made it sound like it was 1 year, but I've been hearing a lot lately that it's 2 now. So is it like formally officially 2 years now, or?
It's 2.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
So-
correct. Yes. Mhm.
I also shared the link with Professor Murray for the induction program. So the other thing to kind of keep in mind when you are looking at your schools, will your district pay for it? So on the link that I shared at the very bottom of the page, it actually lists all the districts within the different regions throughout California that have a program, an induction program. Because honestly, it's very nice not to have to pay for it and like they paid for it, but yeah, it is 2 years.
Yes, agreed. And to add a little bit more to what Hannah said about that, if you do join a program and they offer you continuing education units, This is actually very helpful for salary. If you have a master's, or if you don't have a master's, especially if you just go with like bachelor's credential, to get onto the next pay scale in your salary schedule, if you don't have a master's, continuing education units is how you get on there. But even if you do have a master's, you probably need more continuing educations to move on to the next pay scale to get better salary as years go on. So if your induction program offers you opportunity to also pay to get credits as you're doing the work, because I mean, you're putting in the work, you're doing stuff for it. It's a way to help you get continuing ed units to helpfully put you in a better salary schedule altogether. So just kind of a thing to think about as well too is look at the salary schedule for your district that you're applying to, or if you got the job for, and what you could possibly do to do better for yourself later on as the years go on to get better paid.
Antonio?
Yeah, Antonio?
Hi, thank you, you two. Appreciate your time for coming this evening. I did have a question. I know already like when I'm gonna go eventually, hopefully, you know, start teaching and everything. I know the relationship part is like probably like 80% of the work, right? You're working with the kids, but you both mentioned that you're teaching you know, a lot of different classes, like different subjects as far as history. That's what I'm worried about. Is that kind of like teaching so many subjects, you're becoming like this humongous jack of all trades? Was that workload hard? That's the only part that I'm worried about.
Yeah, is it okay if I go for Santa? It's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thank you, sir. I would say that it can be really difficult. I look at it like this: the first couple of years that you're teaching any subject, you're really building things, right? You're building your material, your lectures, your handouts, your activities, your assessments, everything. And it can be difficult because, like I just said, the first years are all building everything. It might seem like even your first years you're working a lot harder than your successive years because of everything that goes into you just learning how to manage your time, pacing, your workload, and everything that goes into it. It can be difficult, but I also felt like this too. I felt like I learned a lot in my undergrad program in terms of just historical content, right? But tell me why, when it came to having to teach this stuff, that I felt like, oh, I know I learned this all at one moment, but it really isn't until you teach it that you actually know it very well. So you're probably going to feel like that when you start teaching, is that I'm finally going to get to really fully understand everything that Dr. Murray and everyone tried to get into my head. And now I finally got it. Now that I'm teaching it, now I can really explain it well. And now I know it like frontwards, backwards, inwards, outwards, all that stuff. So yes, it could be kind of overwhelming at first, but don't shy away from the challenge because, like I said, it's a very natural, I think, process to have to learn something by trial and error the first time, and then it gets better as it goes along. Before you know it, if you are, however you want to look at it, lucky enough or just whatever enough to teach the same thing more than one time, then you'll perfect it. You'll get better at it. You'll not perfect, but you're going to progress and become better at it, right? Like I said. So yeah, it could be a little bit rough at first, but the first couple of years are just building, and you will get better as time goes on if you get to teach it again.
I will say that in the public school setting, it's not always the case where you have 3 preps, and that's what we call them when you're teaching different class, we call it a prep. I know, and Alex can correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of times you'll see it like when you are kind of the sole history teacher, like academies, charter schools, private schools, some things like that. A lot of times when you are in a smaller setting, you will be, as we call Alex, the jack of all trades. But so for me, like I started out just doing US history, and a lot of it is kind of self-inflicted, and that I can't choose which prep to give up. So it is a lot of work. Honestly, I can't choose what to give up because AP World gives me a chance to kind of go all over the place, which is what I love. US history gives me a chance to kind of go all over the country, which is also what I love. And then Avid 11 is it kind of gives me a chance to help the kids get ready for life after high school. So it's not common that you'll have more than, say, like 2 preps. They generally don't do that. It's only when you're taking on those like extra classes like APs or electives or things like that. And one thing I did not know is you, as a history teacher, might be teaching psychology too. So it falls under umbrella.
No, agreed. Or econ, like apparently we can teach that too. And I sometimes learned that the hard way. So yeah, you're right.
I don't want to keep our guests too far past the bottom of the hour, but I also want to give them an opportunity for any closing thoughts and anybody else for any closing questions. So much really great, so many terrific suggestions here. I love the progress over perfection idea also applied to all these different ideas, all these different realms. For me, that really resonated because I had to prepare courses when I first started here, and that was when I was working with you both for the first time. Some of those classes I was preparing for the first time, preparing to teach as I was teaching them. So, staying a few weeks ahead of the students. And I know that's always the sort of the joke, stay a couple weeks ahead. But as you both said, also, you build that expertise and you build that confidence and it takes a while. So progress over perfection is great. It's also great in terms of form, not just in terms of content, but in terms of form. And I've continued to tinker with organizational methods that I think apply to a lot of the same sort of things, just in terms of sanity maintenance exercises and kind of keeping things structured and keeping things organized. So I think there's a lot of wisdom here, and a lot of it really resonated with me as a reminder. Oh, one thing I did want to ask about: do you ever tinker with the red dot game that you mentioned? I've done a little bit of reacting to the past, and I think I did it in both of the classes that I had with you guys, those debates, right? Do you ever do you ever tinker with the methods of reacting with the past in your own classroom? Those kind of games where a student has to take on a certain role and give a speech or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I do it all the time. You'll find that some classes are stronger than others. So sometimes let them choose. And, you'll find that you'll have maybe like 2 or 3 on one side and then 20 on the other side. Sometimes that's fun because the 2 or 3 really come hard. But it's also assigning them. What I've done is that I've grouped them before into groups of people that they normally are not with. Change is good. It mixes it up and, it gets them out of their shells. And, but yeah, I mean, you're constantly changing.
Yeah, I agree. It's okay to give choice every once in a while, but it's also like Hannah said, you have to challenge and say, like, even this is not your favorite first option, you got to take it on. This is what you've been given to do that. One strategy that I like to use in class for these kinds of things is the agree, disagree sides. I have 4 corners in my room, and I use strongly agree, disagree, and strongly disagree whenever we have a prompt that we offer. And I recently added, I don't know why I haven't done this before, but I added a neutral. In my corners, I now have a neutral zone. I allow students to be there only temporarily before I make them say, okay, well, you've heard arguments from both sides. What are you leaning to more? And depending on what the activity is, if I am just doing it as a warm-up activity, I'll say, okay, is this just for fun to get us engaged? But if it's leaning more towards like an informal assessment, where we're just trying to gauge our understanding and see how much you can convince in others, and I usually base victory off of like how many people you can come get to your side, right? Per percentage, like how many of the neutrals were you able to convince to your side, or how many defected from yours and went to the other, or at least, to the neutral side. So yeah, there's I think I got that idea came from you, Dr. Murray, is like getting different parts and then everyone have to argue. And I think we've just tinkered with it to become something a little bit different and adaptable to a 9 through 12 setting.
Communists versus nationalists.
Communist versus
Yes.
I never did it, but I remember threatening a few times, saying it could be that on the day of the debate, I'm going to change everybody's side.
Yes, I remember that.
I didn't do it, but I had you all ready just in case I did.
I did a quick one. One of you mentioned that the kids might be behind because of things like COVID, or maybe they're just behind. Are there any strategies you have to get like the kids who might be behind up to speed, or does the content need to does that have to go to the lowest common denominator? Like, how does that work?
So I think that was me that mentioned that. You don't want to lower your standards. Rather, you just want to kind of build in a lot more help. So for a lot of us in history, we're kind of given the documents like, hey, go read this and come back. Be prepared to read it with them. or be prepared to, from the very, very early on, even teach them how to recognize a main idea. Like for us, that seems so natural because we're so used to it, but students don't understand what a main idea is. Or you say be specific, they might not even understand that. So that, a lot of that is in the very, very, if you can do it in the very, very, very beginning of the year, you can kind of build those skills. By the time you get to semester 2, they have grown, they have flourished. You'll see that, you know, obviously students will struggle to kind of understand the, obviously, if you have them read something that was from 1700, they don't use the English that we use today. So a lot of times having the kids reword it in how, like their own words, sometimes will help them grasp the main ideas. So it's more hands-on, more than anything else. But I would never say, don't like lower your standards, rather just be more ready to help them get there. Because sometimes, to be honest, and I don't know if Alex, you've ever heard this, sometimes they'll say you do more reading in your class than they do in other classes, and
Yes.
sometimes that's true. And obviously, we want to kind of expose them. We want to get them ready for like the testing, because unfortunately, junior year, that's when it's all happening. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I 1000 agree. I 1000% agree with what Hannah said. Like, you do not lower your standards. The common phrase we heard after COVID or in the midst of it was, meet them where they are, meet them where they are. At one point, I got kind of sick of hearing that, but I understood what it was supposed to be, right? That you're supposed to meet them where they are, not to lower your standards, but help them along the way. Yeah, so what Hannah says is absolutely true. Often enough, you're going to be reading a lot to them in class, and there are strategies that you could use to do this. Like one of them that I know kids hate, but we could turn it into something fun if it's actually effective. If you can spin it this way, is like the popcorn reading method. They don't like to hear themselves read out loud, but it's also kind of exciting if you can turn it into something fun that's not going to be difficult to read, and that it's accessible just to teach them when they get the more difficult stuff to get there. There's also a lot of great resources to make your written work or your documents more accessible. One thing that we use in my district is Newsella. So articles that if you want to gauge them for English learners or for learners at lower reading levels, you can change the word count and the difficulty of the reading to meet where they would be in their reading level. When they're in elementary school, they get something called their zone of proximal development, where they tells them where their reading level is. And unfortunately, that doesn't really follow them to high school, even though I think it really should, to get an idea of like where they should be reading so that they can access your material. And there's lots of ways that you could use other programs to help you make the reading more accessible, right? So that it's not as difficult. And one more thing, I just put this in the chat, but speaking of the conversations about education today, I was talking about this to Hannah and Professor Murray about earlier, that one of the things that I keep seeing coming to my district, and you might see it in the near future, is this universal design learning method. And it addresses exactly what we're talking about right now, is meeting students where they might be behind, how to help them. If you don't want to lower your standards, which you're not supposed to, then how can you make your learning more accessible to them? And this new approach to learning is meant to personalize learning a lot more, to give students access to accessing the information through different methods, you know, where enabling that as much as you can. It doesn't mean that you have to get rid of your reading or that writing will not be part of it. There are just some things that are non-negotiable. They will be part of the learning process. But if a student happens to learn better by watching videos versus just reading, that should be accessible. If they can listen to a podcast as opposed to doing this, if they can do it through some kind of a kinetic exercise as opposed to just doing these stock and standard things, then sometimes that should be something that you challenge yourself to do in the classroom. And again, this is all prescriptive. It's not mandate. It's just more of a, because of the conversations about education changing and how we've had to deal with all the aftermath of the of COVID, it is just ways for teachers to try to access all students and students access all learning in both ways.
Thank you.
That's great. I want to let you guys go. That endorsement of UDL is really terrific. I think it's a very, very rich and expansive mindset. And I've only been sort of at the threshold of it in terms of a pedagogy, but it isn't necessarily, as I understand, it's something that you have to master and say, okay, I got it. I get UDL. It's a threshold that you step into, and it's a new mindset in terms of how you frame your work. And you frame your teaching and approach your students. And it's a progress over perfection thing. Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Hannah, for joining us. This has been really, it's always a delight to catch up with you both. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm gonna have to shut down the Zoom, and then I'm gonna have my MA students back here again for the second half of the seminar. But thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us online. We're gonna go ahead and shut it down. Alexander, I will follow up with you.
Thank you. Good to see you, Hannah. Take care. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you.
Yeah, Alex.